Hello, students. Today we are going to be studying the extraction of biofuels from algae. Yes, our focus will be on microalgae. So the main student learning outcomes, if we need to understand why algae is classified as third generation biofuel. What are some of the general characteristics of algae and what makes them an excellent source for biofuel production? We'll briefly go over the history of algae for algae use. We'll talk about photosynthesis and all the steps that are needed to convert algae into fuels, biofuels. It's renewable and it is clean and it is sustainable. So it is going to play a huge role as we transition to clean energy. What are some of the main advantages and disadvantages and the future? When we say first generation biofuels, these fuels come from edible food sources, like corn or soybean or ethanol from sugarcane. So it's competing for the food supply and agricultural land. So this is not very effective because it's competing with the food supply of human beings. Second generation is derived from biomass like switchgrass, uh, industrial like sawdust, straw, agricultural waste, but still growing them, you need land for that. So grow algae that can be grown in non-agricultural land, wasteland, and very easily. And it grows very fast. So this is referred to as third generation biofuel because it does not compete with the food supply or agricultural land or arable land. And it's just that it can grow so fast. You can get an yield every 10 days. And it can like capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as it's growing. And it can make a lot of lipids that can be converted to biodiesel. And it can be fermented. The biomass can be fermented to make ethanol or gas. So that's why it is very, very attractive. When they say fourth generation, they're referring to like genetically modified, like maybe cyanobacteria, which is a prokaryote where you can modify genes and make it produce more lipids. So that is the fourth generation, very futuristic. They are synthetic biofuels. What are some of the general characteristics of algae? Algae is under the kingdom protist. Some of them are one cell, some of them are multicellular. So the unicellular ones are usually called microalgae. And they can also live in colonies. They do not, like when you look at a plant, we see leaves and stem and twigs and roots. They don't have none of that. They like to grow in an aquatic environment. That's why, the pond scum, which is algae, we see it growing on any wet environments, both freshwater and salt water. They are photosynthetic. They have chlorophyll pigments that can undergo photosynthesis. Another very important thing about algae is they are the bottom. They are the bottom of the food chain. Like little fish will eat the algae. So they're also called phytoplanktons. And you would have studied earlier, like the bottom of the food chain is very important because all the other living organisms will depend on the bottom food chain organism. Here's a picture of a kelp. This is also algae. It can be like 60 feet tall. That's like a 20-story building. So they do come in microscopic forms and huge macroscopic forms. Another very interesting thing about algae is they make um, a lot of oxygen. See, most of the photosynthetic activity that you see in this world map. So this is a NASA picture. Everywhere you're seeing green, it is showing photosynthesis happening. So phytoplankton, which is unicellular algae, is known to account for half of all the photosynthetic activity in the world. So it is playing a huge role in maintaining the oxygen content, which is vital for human beings. Our life depends on this. Isn't it very interesting? And also, like, we've heard stories of how like blue whales and other big mammals, like they will like migrate like to Nova Scotia. That's why there's whale watching in Boston, because they come during certain times to harvest and filter and eat this algae. It's also called phytoplanktons. There's also another microbe. It is called cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. It is a protist. So protists do not have membrane-bound organelles, and the DNA is just floating around. It's a bacteria. They can be found in unicellular forms or colonies, multicellular forms also. So example, see, this algae is responsible for half the oxygen in the atmosphere. And see, rubisco, it's a enzyme that is involved in photosynthesis. Cyanobacteria is a protist because they do not have a nucleus or membrane bound organelles. They do have a lot of chlorophyll A, so they can make a lot of photosynthesis. So this can be potential feedstock, and it can be converted to bioenergy. I want you to be aware of the difference between macroalgae and microalgae. Macroalgae are like kelp that I showed you earlier. Whereas if you go to microalgae, they are unicellular, and it is very, very diverse. 50,000 species have been characterized. They are commonly called phytoplankton, and they are unicellular. And this is the main target for making biofuels. So enormous biodiversity. There are three modes of cultivation of algae. Algae can be autotrophic, meaning it can use the photons of light and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and fix the carbon in its thylakoid membrane that has chlorophyll in order to make sugars, and also like lipids and proteins. That is autotrophic. Heterotrophic, it can even grow in the dark by using chemicals as the electron source in order to drive photosynthesis and chemicals. Or mixotrophic is both. So some of the main things about making biofuel, first we have to grow the algae. You should know the science behind growing algae, either mixotrophic, exotrophic, autotrophic, or heterotrophic forms. Then you bulk it by different techniques called flotation, flocculation, or sedimentation. You thicken it or dewater it. That means it's like concentrating it before you like squeeze out the oil from it or use the biomass for making ethanol. Here's a basic picture of photosynthesis in microalgae. This is the equation. So in photosynthesis, atmospheric carbon dioxide and water in the presence of light is woven together to form sugars, and byproduct is oxygen. So the two things human beings need for survival comes from this basic equation of photosynthesis. It's capturing carbon dioxide. So if the world wants to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, reduce the greenhouse effect, then photosynthesis is the key reaction that we are looking for. So that's why planting trees, is so favored. So here is a microalgae, and it has a huge chloroplast that has a membrane, a stack of membranes called thylakoid membranes, where the special chlorophyll pigment is. And there are two steps called light reactions and light dependent reaction and light independent reaction, or Calvin cycle, named after the scientist who discovered it. So in the light dependent reaction, through a series of reactions, it will make energy, ATP energy, and NADPH, which is a electron carrier. And these two will be used in the Calvin cycle to fix the atmospheric carbon dioxide. It will produce a 3-carbon compound, first compound called a G3P. And then two of them will combine to form sugars. And the sugars are then, by other biochemical reactions, can be converted to oil and proteins. A very brief history of the use of algae by human beings. It's been used as food. See, even 2000 years ago, there's evidence to show that it's been used as food in China thousands of years ago. Also in the Aztec culture in Mexico, spirulina has been used for making spirulina cake or cheese. Bergenic in the 1890s, he saw the value and the nutrition in algae, and he was able to grow pure cultures of chlorella. And then Melvin Calvin, discovered the photosynthesis light independent reactions in chlorella. Harder and Vaughan, which they propose again for both food and fuel. And then in the ninth arc showed that if you starve the algae, it can increase production of oils, which that was a good discovery too. And then when the energy crisis happened in the 1970s, the United States Department of Energy, they allot a lot of money in research of aquatic microalgae. So now the jet fuel is made from algae. There are so many uses of microalgae, human nutrition, because it's full of proteins and carbohydrates and vitamins. Animal nutrition, used for excellent source to capture atmospheric carbon dioxide. It can also be used to treat wastewater. They can remove all the fertilizer runoff, in water bodies. Food additives, cosmetics. So there's lots of uses of microalgae in addition to bioenergy. So let's look at the main steps that is involved in making biofuels. The first step is growing algae, so photosynthesis, and it needs a water body and nutrition to grow algae. After the algae is grown, it is harvested. You can have an harvest in a week. Then it goes through a process called dewatering. De means removal of water. So we are kind of concentrating the algae. Then it is kind of like squeezed to extract the oil. The oil can be converted to biodiesel by transesterification, a chemical process. Or the biomass can be fermented to make bioethanol, which is a very good fuel. And then of course, it can be burnt, and it can run a generator, and it can make electricity also. And it can also make biogas. So how is algae cultivated? There are several techniques for growing algae. See, the first thing to remember, it can grow very, very fast. Several harvests in a very short period of time. So it's not competing with agricultural land. And this is called closed loop system. It is not exposed to the air, thereby everything it needs for growth is provided. But the advantage of this system is it is contamination free. Whereas if you, this open pond, which is a cheaper system, and there's lots of this, and they are like ponds, large water ponds where the algae grows. There's a paddle weed for aeration. Here, the problem is contamination by other microbes. Photobioreactors, here it's a bioreactor where nutrient-rich water will be pumped and it's exposed to sunlight, more expensive. Turf scrubber is a system designed for removing pollutants by using algal scrubbers. So there are many ways to grow algae. And then after you grow it, how are you going to harvest it? So flocculation means they'll add some chemicals so that it can clump together like this. And then given enough time, it will settle by itself. Or they will filter it, or they have techniques called flotation where bubbles will be sent up to get it, or by sedimentation. After you get the algae, it has to be thickened. Usually it is thickened and dewatered. So it's usually done by a centrifuge until you get like a sludge-like algae. And sometimes the next step will want some drying of this algae before it's used. And then if you're going to make biodiesel, the oil has to be separated. So they can use a mechanical press where the algae will be passed through a very narrow nozzle, and it will kind of like mechanically expel the oil out of the algal cell. So you can get 70% out this way. The next method is called hexane solvent method, where it will be reacted with a hexane solvent. So like these methods are more expensive, but you can get 95% of the oil out of the algae. Superfluid carbon dioxide method, you can get 100% out extraction. But this is more expensive. So after the oil is extracted, it will undergo a chemical process called transesterification. There's also other methods like blending and pyrolysis. But in transesterification method, methanol and another solution will be mixed, and in order to extract the oil. And after the oil is extracted, it will be converted to biodiesel, and like glycerin byproducts are the ones that used in pharmaceuticals and in the makeup industry, cosmetic industry. So the oil will undergo chemical processing in order to make biodiesel, which is used as a fuel for buses and even planes and ships. The other very interesting phenomena is biohydrogen production from algae. So this is a new technology. It's like a photobiological water splitting in a photobioreactor. It is like a fuel cell that will make hydrogen. So algae was discovered to produce hydrogen under certain conditions. So here in 2000, it was discovered that Chlamydomonas reinhardtii algae, if it is deprived of sulfur, it will switch from the production of oxygen as a byproduct, which is seen in normal photosynthesis, to the production of hydrogen. And this biohydrogen is a clean fuel. So microalgae can make biodiesel, biohydrogen, bioethanol, and biomethane. So let's see bioethanol. So the biomass, right after you extract the oil, the biomass can be fermented by microbes, especially like yeast, to make ethanol. So ethanol is a clean burning biofuel. Byproduct is carbon dioxide, but this carbon dioxide is going to use up when it was growing. So that's why it's like carbon neutral. The other biofuel is methane gas. So it can also, microalgae can also be fermented by anaerobic digestion. So that's the technology that will produce a lot of biogas that can be used for energy. So algae has tremendous potentials for the future and a lot of advantages. The thing is, there is no feedstock or biomass that can match algae in terms of quantity or diversity. Diversity is intense, and the way the how quick it grows so fast. It can produce oil that can be converted to biodiesel. It can be algae is like, because the genome is small, you can do a lot of genetic engineering in order to make it produce more sugars or more oil, like biodiesel, ethanol, and so forth. The butanol that can be made, the alcohol called butanol that is made, is very similar to gasoline. So again, it is very attractive as a biofuel. Yield. It can produce 9,000 gallons of biofuels per acre, which is tenfold more. So according to the United States Department of Energy, algae can produce 10 times higher yields than the second generation biofuels that we have now. Some disadvantages is that it requires a water body and nutrition like nitrogen and phosphorus to grow. The technology that is involved for dewatering or centrifugation and so forth is expensive. So currently, the net energy invested into producing biofuel from algae is greater than the amount of energy that can be extracted. So it's not economically viable in many cases. So just large scale implementation is challenging. But there is a lot of research to overcome all these disadvantages. Contamination is also a problem in open pools. This picture is just talking about the genetically modified algae in order to enhance lipid content, carbohydrate content, and protein content. So this kind of leads to the fourth generation use of biofuels. But this is a very good summary slide that shows like abiotic stress can increase the oil production in microalgae, and genetic engineering is a focus now in order for it to be more effective. So this slide reflects the future of biofuel production from microalgae. Algae biofuel market will reach an estimated United States of dollars of 12.82 billion by 2027. So this is a data that has been put out. So with a growth rate of 8%. So this looks very good. So you can see how this graph is showing all the different countries. So the projection of future market of biofuel production is tremendous. And I hope that was helpful.